Hey everyone, welcome to wiseman.tech. So today we will discuss what is Git and what is the difference between Git and GitHub and some features of Git. What is Git and some of the features of Git and what exactly is the difference between Git and GitHub or Bitbucket or GitLab. So without further ado, let's get into what exactly is Git? So Git is basically a version control system which is used for SCM. SCM is source code management. Source code management. So let's say there is a repo in which many people are contributing. Let's say person A, person B and person C are contributing to this repo. So there has to be some sort of version control that needs to be done, right? That means let's say A does file changes, and similarly B does some 2 file changes and C does some 7 file changes. So there has to be some ledger which will maintain all these changes done by respective contributor, and it is used to track those changes, so that if some file has been changed by, let's say file X has been changed by 2 contributors B and C, we will exactly get to know when this change was done and as part of which date or which author and which commit this change is part of, right? So I use the word commit, so I'll come to that. So this is Git is basically a version control system which is used to manage a repository with and track its changes, right? This is one of the use cases in layman terms. What exactly is Git? Why Git is so efficient, right? So Git is basically a distributed version control system. When I say distributed, that means if there is a repository here, and let's talk about client server first. Client server, what happens in client server? If 3 people are contributing A, B, C, these 3 people always need to be online to be able to do any file changes. So let's say A want to change file A, sorry for that. So let's say A want to change file X, and B want to change the same file X, and C want to change, let's say, file Y. So here, since A and B are working on the same repository, the first drawback is they need to be online in client server, because this repository will be hosted in, let's say, x.y.z.p in this IP. So these 3 people should be connected to internet always to be able to commit the changes, or rather make the changes to the file, or take the latest changes from of the file. That is one drawback in client server. And second drawback is conflicts, right? Because A and B are working on the same file X, so they might end up messing up the file. Or maybe if, let's say, C is working on file Y and he has done some malicious comments, let's call it, just thinking about some symbol, or let's say C is working on this file Y, so he must have messed up this file, so he must have corrupted this file, right? And let's say this goes into the repository, which will end up killing the work of A and B both, because now they take the latest changes, because they are always connected to the server. If C end up messing something, A and B's work also will be halted. So this is a drawback of client server. That's where the distributed version control management system is so popular from the past one and a half decades. So what exactly is distributed version control management system? Let's get into that. So what happens in a distributed version control system? So there is a repository here which is again hosted in x.y.z.p, let's say in this IP address, and there are three contributors A, B, C who wants to contribute to this repo. In a distributed version control system, there will be A's own local copy, or let's call it as clone. Clone is basically a copy, and similarly B will have his own local copy and C will have his own local copy, right? And this is, since it's a local copy, whatever operations A does to this repository will be only reflected in his local repo and not be reflected in the main repo. So let's call it as master. So what happens in a distributed system? A only connects to the main repo when he wants to push the changes from his repo to main repo, or when he wants to pull the changes from the main repo to his local repo. And similarly, so does with B and C. So this makes life very simple for ABC because all three of them are doing the changes independently. A is not dependent on B, or B is not dependent on C, and vice versa. And all the operations that A does to his local repository are very fast. So we'll talk about the operations that we can do using Git. But let's say, simple in layman terms, A wants to change 3 files and he wants to commit those changes, or he wants to save those changes. All these operations are very quick because A don't need to connect to A only needs internet when he wants to push or pull the changes from the main repository. But other than that, when he is working on his changes, he don't need any internet connection. So changes are very quick because there is no network calls involved basically. So that makes it very quick. So this is what distributed version control management system is about, right?